Jamal Carter's life was a delicate balancing act. At 23, he was a college senior in Atlanta, Georgia, carrying the weight of too many responsibilities and not enough hours in the day. His mornings began with lectures in crowded classrooms, afternoons were spent poring over textbooks in the library, and evenings found him hustling as a waiter at Rosie's Diner, a quaint, 24-hour spot nestled between high-rise buildings and graffiti-streaked alleyways. Despite the constant hustle, Jamal kept his head high. His dream of becoming a lawyer wasn't just for him, it was for his late mother, who had instilled in him the belief that education was the key to a better future. It was for his younger sister, LaToya, who looked up to him as a father figure. It was for the life he envisioned, a life free from the financial shackles that had defined his upbringing. But dreams didn't pay the bills, and Jamal was drowning in student debt. The modest checks he earned at Rosie's barely covered rent and groceries, let alone tuition. Some nights, as he lay on the lumpy mattress in his one-room apartment, the thought of giving up crept into his mind. Yet, every morning, he rose with renewed determination. It was during one of these long, exhausting shifts at Rosie's that Jamal's life took an unexpected turn. The dinner rush had ended, and the diner had quieted to a low hum. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint aroma of grease from the kitchen. Jamal was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door jingled. He glanced up to see a woman enter, a striking figure, despite her age. She had an air of sophistication that seemed out of place in the modest diner. Her silver hair was impeccably styled, and a diamond necklace caught the light as she moved. She wore a tailored coat that likely cost more than Jamal's yearly salary. Yet, there was something unpretentious about the way she carried herself as she slid into the corner booth, her posture straight but not stiff. Jamal approached her table with his usual polite smile. "Good evening, ma'am. Can I get you started with something to drink?" She looked up, her sharp blue eyes studying him for a moment before she smiled. "Coffee, black." "And, what's your name, young man?" "Jamal," he replied, surprised by the question. "Jamal," she repeated, as if tasting the name. "I'm Eleanor." "Nice to meet you." Over the next few minutes, Eleanor placed her order, grilled cheese and tomato soup, simple and comforting. As Jamal brought her food, she struck up a conversation. "You're a college student, aren't you?" she asked, her tone more statement than question. Jamal nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Senior year." "And what are you studying?" "Pre-law." Her eyebrows lifted in approval. "Ambitious. Let me guess, you're working here to pay your way through school?" Jamal hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Something like that." Eleanor nodded, as if she understood more than he was saying. They talked briefly, about his studies, her fondness for diners, and the unpredictable Atlanta weather. By the time she left, Jamal found himself oddly uplifted by the encounter. Eleanor became a regular. Every Thursday evening, she occupied the same booth, always ordering the same meal. Their conversations grew longer, and Jamal learned more about her. She was a 75-year-old widow, the late wife of a real estate tycoon. With no children and few close relatives, she spent much of her time on philanthropic ventures. Her stories of travel and adventure captivated Jamal, offering a glimpse into a world far removed from his own. Eleanor, in turn, was charmed by Jamal's humility and quiet resilience. She admired his ambition and found solace in his authenticity. He wasn't like the sycophants she often encountered in her social circles. One Thursday evening, as the diner's fluorescent lights flickered softly, Eleanor lingered after her meal. She seemed pensive, her gaze fixed on the steaming cup of coffee in front of her. "Jamal," she began, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, clearing the adjacent table. "I've been thinking." She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "You know, I've lived a full life, more than most people can say. But lately, I've been yearning for something different. Someone to share my days with, even if only briefly." Jamal set the tray he was holding on the counter, giving her his full attention. "What do you mean?" Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her eyes glinting with both seriousness and a touch of mischief. Would you consider marrying me? The question hung in the air, absurd and impossible. Jamal stared at her, convinced he had misheard. Excuse me? I'm serious, Eleanor said, her tone steady. Not a traditional marriage, mind you. Think of it as an arrangement. I get companionship, you get financial stability. We help each other. Jamal felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. Why me? He managed to ask. Because you're genuine, Eleanor replied simply. And because I believe in your potential. With my resources, I can help you achieve your dreams. Jamal's mind raced. The idea was preposterous, wasn't it? But then he thought about his mounting debt, the constant stress, and the elusive dream of law school. Eleanor was offering him a lifeline, albeit an unconventional one. I don't know, he stammered. I need time to think about it. Of course, Eleanor said with a small smile. Take all the time you need. Jamal spent the next week in turmoil. He replayed Eleanor's proposal over and over, weighing the pros and cons. On one hand, it felt wrong, almost mercenary. On the other hand, the opportunity to escape his financial burdens was tempting. He confided in his best friend, Marcus, who listened with a mix of disbelief and intrigue. Man, this sounds like something out of a movie, Marcus said, shaking his head. But honestly, if it helps you get to where you need to be, why not? Jamal wasn't convinced, but he couldn't shake the idea. A week later, Jamal found himself standing outside Eleanor's townhouse, a grand, ivy-covered building in one of Atlanta's most upscale neighborhoods. He took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. Eleanor answered almost immediately, as if she had been expecting him. Come in, she said warmly, leading him to a cozy sitting room filled with antique furniture and framed photographs. Jamal took a seat, his palms clammy. I've thought about your proposal, he began, his voice steady, despite his nerves. And I'll do it. Eleanor's face lit up with a smile. You've made the right decision, Jamal. I promise you won't regret it. Their wedding was a quiet affair, a simple courthouse ceremony attended by a handful of witnesses. Jamal wore his only suit, and Eleanor donned a tasteful lavender dress. News of their marriage spread quickly, shocking everyone who knew them. Jamal's co-workers at Rosie's were stunned, while Eleanor's social circle buzzed with gossip. What does she see in him? Whispered one of Eleanor's acquaintances. Probably the same thing she saw in her first husband, another replied. Potential. For Jamal, life as Eleanor's husband was surreal. He moved into her townhouse, trading his cramped apartment for a spacious guest room. Eleanor was true to her word, covering his tuition and helping him focus on his studies. In return, Jamal provided companionship, joining her for dinners, accompanying her to charity events, and listening to her stories late into the night. Despite the unconventional nature of their relationship, a genuine friendship blossomed. Eleanor's sharp wit and wisdom became a source of inspiration for Jamal, while his youthful optimism brought a spark to her days. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that their arrangement was too good to be true. He wondered what lay ahead, both for himself and for the woman who had taken a chance on him. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the meaning of family. The first days of marriage felt like a whirlwind for Jamal Carter, as if he had been thrust into a life that wasn't his own. Eleanor's mansion was nothing short of a palace, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of Atlanta, framed by manicured lawns, marble fountains, and wrought iron gates. It was a far cry from the tiny, one-room apartment he had called home for years. Each step he took inside felt surreal, his sneakers squeaking softly against marble floors, polished to a mirror shine. Ornate chandeliers hung from the ceilings, throwing shimmering patterns across walls adorned with priceless art. Every room seemed like a set piece from a movie he didn't belong in. Eleanor, true to her word, made it clear that her support extended beyond the marriage contract. You're here to focus on your future, she said one morning as they sat in the sunlit breakfast room. The table, large enough to seat a dozen, was set with an assortment of pastries, fresh fruit, and steaming coffee. "Think of this house as your sanctuary. Whatever you need, just ask." Jamal nodded, overwhelmed but grateful. She provided him with a brand new laptop, sleek and state-of-the-art, and even arranged for a private tutor to help him prepare for the LSATs. For the first time in years, Jamal felt as though the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. No more double shifts at the diner, no more nights spent worrying about how to scrape together rent. For once, he could breathe. Eleanor's kindness wasn't limited to material support. She treated him with respect and genuine warmth, never condescending, despite their stark differences in age, wealth, and experience. "We're partners in this," she often reminded him, and Jamal began to believe it. They spent evenings talking in the library, a grand room lined with shelves of leather-bound books. Eleanor would share stories of her late husband and her travels around the world, and Jamal found himself opening up about his childhood, his struggles, and his dreams of becoming a lawyer. Their conversations flowed easily, and though their relationship lacked romantic intimacy, it was built on a foundation of mutual understanding and trust. Life at the mansion also came with exposure to a world Jamal had only seen from a distance. Eleanor introduced him to her social circle, an eclectic mix of business magnates, philanthropists, and politicians. Charity galas, business dinners, and art exhibitions became part of his routine. At first, he felt out of place among the glittering gowns and tailored suits, but Eleanor's quiet encouragement gave him confidence. "Remember, Jamal," she told him one evening before a gala, adjusting the lapels of his tuxedo, "you belong here as much as anyone else. Never forget that." Slowly but surely, Jamal began to believe her. These events weren't just glamorous distractions, they were opportunities. Eleanor's introductions opened doors he'd never imagined. Internship offers from prestigious law firms, mentorship from seasoned professionals, and insights into a world that had always seemed unattainable. Yet, amidst the glitz and promise, something felt off. At first, it was the staff. Eleanor's household employees were polite and efficient, but Jamal couldn't ignore the way their demeanor shifted whenever he entered a room. Conversations would halt abruptly, and furtive glances would be exchanged. The butler, a tall man named Charles with an air of practiced discretion, always seemed to be watching him out of the corner of his eye. Even the housekeeper, Mrs. Jennings, who had been kind enough to show Jamal the workings of the mansion, grew tight-lipped when he asked questions about Eleanor's routine. "They're just not used to change," Eleanor assured him when he brought it up one evening. She was seated in her favorite armchair by the fireplace, a glass of wine in hand. "This household has run like clockwork for years. Don't take it personally." Jamal nodded, but the unease lingered. Then there was the lawyer. Mr. Whitaker, a stern man in his 60s with silver hair and piercing eyes, visited the mansion frequently. His meetings with Eleanor were always behind closed doors, and though Jamal never eavesdropped, he couldn't help but notice the tension that followed. One afternoon, as Jamal passed the study, he overheard snippets of a heated discussion. "You're taking a risk, Eleanor," Whitaker's voice carried through the door, sharp and disapproving. "It's my decision, not yours," Eleanor replied firmly. "Just make sure everything is in order." The door opened suddenly, and Whitaker stepped out, his expression icy. He barely acknowledged Jamal as he brushed past, muttering something under his breath. Jamal hesitated, glancing at Eleanor, who stood by her desk with a composed but distant expression. "Everything all right?" he asked. She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just business, Jamal. Nothing for you to worry about." Eleanor herself began to change in subtle ways. Though she remained kind and supportive, Jamal often caught her staring out the window, her gaze fixed on some unseen horizon. She seemed lost in thought, her usual sharp wit giving way to long silences. Once, as they shared dinner in the grand dining room, he noticed her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her glass. "Eleanor, are you okay?" he asked gently. She looked up, startled, as if pulled from a dream. "I'm fine," she said quickly, forcing a smile. Just tired, that's all. But Jamal wasn't convinced. Something was weighing on her, something she wasn't sharing. He wanted to press her for answers, but he held back, unsure of his place in her life. Despite their growing friendship, there were parts of Eleanor's world that remained impenetrable. One evening, as Jamal prepared to retire to his room, he passed Eleanor's study and noticed the door ajar. Inside, she was seated at her desk, a stack of papers before her. The soft glow of the desk lamp cast shadows on her face, making her appear older and more fragile than he had ever seen her. She was holding a photograph, her thumb brushing over the edges as she stared at it with a wistful expression. Jamal hesitated, then knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Eleanor?" She looked up, quickly setting the photograph down. "Jamal," she said, her voice warm but tinged with fatigue. "What brings you here?" "I just wanted to check on you," he said, stepping into the room. "You've seemed distracted lately." Eleanor sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Life has a way of catching up with you," she said softly. "No matter how far you think you've run." Jamal frowned, sensing the weight behind her words. "If there's something on your mind, you can talk to me. You've done so much for me, let me be there for you too." Eleanor's smile was bittersweet. "You have a kind heart, Jamal. Never lose that." She hesitated, as if on the verge of saying more, but then shook her head. "It's nothing you need to worry about. Go get some rest." Reluctantly, Jamal nodded and left, but her words lingered in his mind. Something was undeniably amiss, and though Eleanor seemed determined to shield him from it, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she was facing would soon come to affect them both. The days turned into weeks, and Jamal tried to focus on his studies and the opportunities Eleanor's world had opened for him. But the oddities persisted, gnawing at the edges of his newfound comfort. The mansion, for all its grandeur, began to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage. Jamal couldn't help but wonder, what secrets was Eleanor hiding, and how long could she keep them at bay? On the 7th day of their marriage, Jamal stumbled upon a locked drawer in Eleanor's study. He'd been searching for a book she'd recommended but couldn't resist his curiosity. Using a paperclip, he picked the lock and uncovered a stack of documents that made his blood run cold. At the top was a will, recently updated to name him as the sole beneficiary of Eleanor's fortune. Beneath it were letters addressed to various charities, detailing plans to donate millions of dollars. And then there was a medical report. Eleanor had been diagnosed with a terminal illness and had only months to live. Jamal sat back, the weight of the discovery pressing down on him. This marriage wasn't just an arrangement, it was Eleanor's way of ensuring her legacy and securing companionship in her final days. He realized the depth of her loneliness and the trust she'd placed in him. As the gravity of the situation sank in, Jamal felt a mixture of emotions. Guilt for agreeing to the marriage without knowing Eleanor's true motives. Admiration for her courage in facing her illness with such dignity. And a newfound sense of responsibility to make her remaining days as meaningful as possible. Eleanor entered the study moments later, catching Jamal with the open drawer. Her face betrayed a flicker of surprise but quickly softened into resignation. "I suppose you've discovered my little secret," she said quietly, sitting down across from him. Jamal struggled to find the right words. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked, his voice tinged with both accusation and concern. "Because I didn't want your pity," Eleanor replied. "I wanted someone who would treat me like a person, not a dying woman. You've done that, Jamal. And for that, I'm grateful." Her honesty struck a chord in him. "You don't have to say anything," she said with a gentle smile. "Just promise me one thing, live your life fully. Don't let my situation weigh you down." But Jamal couldn't ignore the heaviness in his heart. Over the next few days, he began to look at Eleanor through a different lens. Her laughter seemed more precious, her wisdom more profound. He resolved to make her remaining time as joyful as possible, throwing himself into planning small surprises, heartfelt conversations, and moments of levity. Eleanor, in turn, began to open up about her past. She shared stories of her youth, her late husband, and the adventures that had shaped her. Jamal found himself growing more attached to her, not as a benefactor or a mentor, but as a genuine friend. The mansion, once an imposing symbol of wealth, became a haven of warmth and connection. The staff, initially wary of Jamal, began to see his genuine care for Eleanor and softened toward him. Even the frequent visits from her lawyer took on a new context. They were part of her meticulous plan to leave a lasting impact. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Eleanor handed Jamal a leather-bound journal. "This is for you," she said. "Fill it with your dreams, your plans, your thoughts. And when you've achieved them, look back and remember this time." Jamal accepted the journal with a lump in his throat. "Thank you, Eleanor. For everything." "No, Jamal," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Thank you for being here. For being you." With her blessing, Jamal took a leave of absence from his part-time job to focus on their time together. They began to explore life in ways Jamal had only dreamed of. Eleanor, despite her illness, was eager to experience the world anew through his youthful perspective. Their adventures began small, leisurely walks through Eleanor's lush gardens, cooking meals together in the grand kitchen, and spending hours discussing everything from philosophy to favorite childhood memories. Soon, they ventured beyond the mansion, visiting art galleries, attending theater performances, and even taking a spontaneous weekend trip to Savannah. Eleanor's energy waned at times, but her spirit remained unbroken. She delighted in Jamal's curiosity and his knack for finding joy in the simplest things. He, in turn, marveled at her wisdom and resilience. "You've given me more than I ever expected," she told him one evening as they watched the sunset from the balcony. "Thank you for making me feel alive again." As the weeks turned into months, their bond deepened in ways neither had anticipated. Jamal discovered that wealth and age were irrelevant when it came to true connection. Eleanor, in turn, found renewed purpose in guiding Jamal. She taught him the art of fine living, how to navigate social circles, appreciate classical music, and hold his own in conversations with influential figures. These lessons, while valuable, were secondary to the life lessons she imparted. The importance of kindness, the courage to pursue one's dreams, and the strength to face life's uncertainties. Eleanor reached out and placed a hand on his. "Jamal, you're giving me something no amount of money could buy: companionship, laughter, and hope. That is more than enough." Her words stayed with him, spurring him to push past his doubts. He began organizing small surprises for Eleanor, like inviting her closest friends for an intimate dinner party or arranging for her favorite pianist to perform at the mansion. These gestures brought light to her days and reminded Jamal of the impact he could make. One afternoon, as they sat in the study reviewing Eleanor's charitable plans, she turned to Jamal with a solemn expression. "There's one more thing I need to ask of you," she said. "When I'm gone, I want you to ensure that my vision for these charities comes to life. Promise me you'll see it through." Jamal's throat tightened, but he nodded. "I promise," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of her request. "I'll make sure your legacy lives on." Eleanor smiled, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "You're the best decision I've ever made, Jamal." "Thank you." That night, as he reflected on her words, Jamal felt a renewed sense of purpose. When Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep, Jamal was heartbroken but grateful for the time they'd shared. Her loss left a void that was difficult to fill, but her presence lingered in every corner of the mansion and in the countless memories they had created together. Her funeral was a grand affair, attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched. Friends, colleagues, and beneficiaries of her generosity shared heartfelt stories, painting a picture of a woman whose kindness knew no bounds. For Jamal, the funeral was both a farewell and a call to action. Among Eleanor's final wishes was a detailed plan for her estate. She had left the entirety of her fortune to Jamal, along with a carefully outlined vision for continuing her philanthropic work. "You have the heart for this," she had written in a letter addressed to him. "Use what I've built to create something even greater." Initially overwhelmed by the responsibility, Jamal turned to the lessons Eleanor had imparted during their time together. He started by finishing law school, funding his education with the inheritance she'd left him. Armed with a degree and a renewed sense of purpose, Jamal launched the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation. The foundation's mission was clear: to provide opportunities for underprivileged students, support community development projects, and fund medical research, all causes close to Eleanor's heart. The foundation quickly gained momentum. Drawing on the connections Eleanor had introduced him to, Jamal secured partnerships with prominent organizations and influential figures. He poured his energy into ensuring that every initiative was a reflection of Eleanor's values. Scholarships were awarded to students who, like Jamal, showed promise despite financial hardships. Community centers were built in underserved neighborhoods, providing resources and safe spaces for families. Grants were issued to hospitals and research institutions, advancing the fight against diseases Eleanor had been passionate about. Despite the demands of running the foundation, Jamal made time to mentor young people, sharing his story and encouraging them to pursue their dreams. He often spoke about Eleanor, describing her as the catalyst for his transformation. "She saw something in me when I didn't see it in myself," he would say. "Her belief in me changed everything." Over time, Jamal's efforts garnered recognition. He was invited to speak at conferences and featured in articles highlighting the foundation's impact. Yet, he remained humble, always crediting Eleanor for the work being done. "This isn't about me," he often said. "It's about honoring a woman who spent her life making the world a better place." In quieter moments, Jamal found solace in the memories of his time with Eleanor. He kept her favorite chair in the study exactly as she'd left it and often sat there, reflecting on their conversations. Her words of wisdom became a guiding force, reminding him to approach life with resilience and compassion. Years later, on the anniversary of Eleanor's passing, Jamal hosted a gala in her honor. The event celebrated the foundation's achievements and the legacy of the woman who had inspired it all. As he addressed the attendees, Jamal's voice was steady but filled with emotion. "Eleanor taught me that the greatest wealth lies not in material possessions, but in the lives we touch and the love we share. Her spirit lives on in every scholarship, every community project, and every act of kindness this foundation supports." After the gala, Jamal returned to the mansion, now a hub for the foundation's operations. He walked through the gardens where he and Eleanor had spent countless afternoons, and paused beneath the oak tree where they had once shared a quiet moment. Looking up at the stars, he felt a profound sense of peace. In the end, Jamal realized that Eleanor's greatest gift wasn't her wealth or even the opportunities it had afforded him. It was the lessons she'd taught him about resilience, compassion, and the transformative power of human connection. Those lessons had not only changed his life but had also set him on a path to change the lives of others, a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come.